bold, vigilant. That is how I have been described, and that is how, indeed, I would describe myself. Please allow me an introduction. The name is Lieutenant Colonel Banastre Tarleton of His Majesty's British Legion here in former British North America. And I arrived here this afternoon in Gloucester Courthouse amongst all of you civilians of this environment on this unrecorded visit in 1784. And I come here for several reasons. One, to recount what took place not far from here on the 3rd of October of the year 1781, known as the Battle of the Hook, or some refer to it as the Battle of Gloucester Point, or unfortunately, I even saw a sign that said, Tarleton's Last Stand. Well, I'm still standing. Well, gentlemen and ladies, I'm hopeful to tell you a little bit about myself as well. For I am fearful that many of you are of the opinion that I am not a very pleasant person. Many of you have no doubt heard rumors about me. Madam, perhaps you have heard Tarleton's Quarter, or Bloody Band, or even the Butcher. Indeed, all names that are unfounded. Indeed, they are. And I am hopeful that by the conclusion of my discussion here today, you will have a better idea of who I am, what I have done, and the grand exploits that I have taken part in this war for, as you call, the War for American Independence. But I know I am not going to be well received, because I dare say that the vast majority of you are in favor of the Congress and General Washington. Is that correct?
Huzzah!
At least that fellow in the back is. But I am actually happy to hear that not all of you rang out with enthusiasm. So maybe there are some loyalists amongst you that perhaps want to hear my story and want to hear the truth, despite all of the lies and the insults. I do have a sword, madam, but I am a gentleman, and you shall hear much about that said sword. So, gentlemen and ladies, if we are to hear about my story, we must start from the beginning. Indeed, I was born on the 21st of August of the year 1754 in Liverpool, England. My father was the mayor of that city. My family took part in a great deal of trade, and that is how we were able to acquire our fortune. I was one of 7 children, alas, the third born, but unfortunately the eldest had passed. And I turned out to be the most enthusiastic of the children, the one that was destined to become a soldier of great success. So at first, my father did not wish for me to be a soldier. In fact, it was his thought, it was his wish, it was his desire that I become a barrister, a lawyer. Gentlemen, you are welcome to come and join us. Indeed, don't stand on parade. I know perhaps I am a bit intimidating, but come, put yourselves at ease. So, alas, in 1770, it was decided that I would go from Liverpool there to Oxford. There I was to attend Middle Temple. And if you are not familiar with this is the best place within the United Kingdom in which to study the law. Indeed, I had excelled at sports. I liked to play cricket. I liked to play tennis. Of course, I like to go fox hunting. I like to enjoy myself with my comrades. So there were many diversions there within England. So when I attended the school, I must admit, perhaps like some of you present, I did not attend to my studies as well as I should have. Are there any present like that? No need. Oh, look, he really agrees. Well done. I'm glad there's a kindred spirit amongst us. Well, nonetheless, as I was studying in 1773, unfortunately, I received word. My beloved father, the mayor of Liverpool, had passed. But as a result of that, I would receive an inheritance, and that inheritance would be £5,000 sterling. Now, I'm not sure what that means to you, madam, or to you, sir, but that is a great deal of money. In 1773, the average tradesman within London is making £50 sterling. So can you imagine acquiring a sum of £5,000 sterling? It is a fortune. There I was at Oxford in London with £5,000 within my pocket, and a young man who did not attend to his studies. So, I pose a question to you. What do you think happened with that money? Yes, no need to laugh, madam. Yes, I spent it well. I went to the theater. I did a bit of gambling. Indeed, I enjoyed myself immensely. But believe it or not, by 1775, within 2 years, I had spent the entirety of my inheritance, £5,000. Well, what is a young man to do who did not do well at his schooling, who had run out of his inheritance, but was filled with vigor and enthusiasm? What do you think, madam? What would I do? Become a soldier, exactly, madam. But I had spent all of my money, so what was I to do? Well, I had to go to my beloved mother, of course, and I had to request, Mother, would you be so kind as to purchase a commission in the King's Army, that I might become an officer in the great Fortune and King's Army of England. So, in the 18th century, dear friends, those of you who are perhaps not familiar with the custom, you can purchase a rank in the King's Army or in the King's Navy. It is a considerable amount of money, but as a result of that, you will receive that. So, of course, the higher the rank, the more it will cost. So my mother bestowed upon me £800, in which I would purchase a cornetcy. A cornet is the most junior grade lieutenant in the cavalry. So, of course, being that I was a great horseman, I wanted to join the cavalry. And I wanted to be part of the greatest cavalry regiment on the planet. And that was the 1st Dragoon Guards of the King. And thus I received that commission. I received that commission on the 20th day of April, 1775. Does anyone know what happened the day before? You don't? You've heard of that shot heard round the world called Lexington and Concord. Of course, I was in London. No one had heard of that shot heard round the world. But it is interesting that it occurred the day before, and I was now a soldier in the King's regiments. Once news came of the war that was about to begin here in North America, I requested what we call the King's Leave. That is, requesting to leave your parent regiment, the King's Guards, and there join a regiment that was about to be deployed to America. And that was granted to me. I joined then the 16th Light Dragoons, and they were destined to assemble at Cork in Ireland and make their way across the ocean under the command, interesting enough, of Lord Cornwallis himself. And thus I joined that expedition, and we crossed the ocean, and we landed in America. And we came to Cape Fear in North Carolina, and made our way southward, for we were going to take that rebel stronghold of Charleston. But it did not work out quite as well as we had hoped. Indeed, the attack upon Charleston was folly. It fell apart nearly immediately. In fact, I found one writer in a gazette that spoke of a alligator, which she referred to as a gator, that nearly bit off the leg of young Cornet Tarleton. Can you imagine that? Nothing could be further from the truth. People will write about anything. Goodness gracious. But regardless, after we abandoned the attack upon Charleston, we made our way to New York, and thus began my military career in America. Now, I used to frequent a tavern, but actually it was a coffee house, called the Cocoa Tree Lounge on St. James, there in London town. It was called that because early on they used to serve chocolate, warm chocolate in a cup, and some of the niceties that were to be found in India as well as from the West Indies. So it was a popular place in which gentlemen would talk, would discuss politics, and they would bet on everything below the sun. To include, if it was raining and 2 drops were going from a window pane, which one would go to the bottom first? That is how much they liked to gamble. Well, while I was there, and as I had just received my commission before I had departed, I had made a promise to my comrades. For there was an English officer named General Charles Lee, who had left the King's regiments and decided to join with the Americans. Can you imagine? What a betrayal! Well, I had promised, and I stood up upon the table. I drew my sword, and I told them, with this saber, I will cut off the head of General Charles Lee. Well, little did I know, I was about to have my opportunity. For it would be in December of 1776, while I was performing reconnaissance with the 16th Regiment of Light Dragoons, that we soon discovered that General Charles Lee had decided to leave his brigade and go about 3 miles away to a place called White's Tavern. There, well, he was going to indulge in some good foodstuffs, no doubt. Well, while he was there, I sent out my small expedition of about 10 dragoons, and we surrounded the house. And what occurred next was this. I kicked down the door with my boot. I drew my sword. I came towards General Charles Lee, and I, well, took him prisoner. My commanding officer would not allow me to cut off his head. So thus I could not boast to my friends that I cut off the head of General Charles Lee. But nonetheless, I had distinguished myself, and I was mentioned in the dispatches all the way to the Supreme Commander of English forces in North America, General Howe. So soon, exploit after exploit, I would find great success. I would volunteer for every mission. I was mentioned off and on upon these dispatches. I would take part in many different engagements. I would even take part in the great Battle of Brandywine against General Washington. But unfortunately, by the beginning of the year 1778, we would soon discover that the Americans and the French were beginning to parley. What had gone from a simple misunderstanding betwixt His Majesty's colonies here in North America and her parent country of England had now come into a world conflict in which the French had the audacity to recognize the United States of America as its own free and independent nation. Can you imagine that? Well, of course, this would turn it into a world war. It would turn it from a rebellion, a revolt, a civil war of sorts, to a world war that would be fought across the globe, in India, Africa, the West Indies, in Europe itself, and of course it would continue here in North America. Well, new things needed to be established. We had a change of command. General Howe would be removed, and he would be replaced by General Clinton, and he would be Supreme Commander of all British forces in North America. But not before we gave him, as you might say here in America, a goodbye gift, a going-away party, as you Americans like to call it. And there in Philadelphia City, the largest city in former English North America, 40,000 souls, we threw something called the Michienza. Oh, the Michienza was quite a festival. All of the officers dressed in their full dress, as the French call it, the grand tenue. There, some of us even dressed as noble knights. And the motto of on my shield would be swift, bold, and vigilant. And I have always tried to live up to that. We said our goodbyes to General Howe and welcomed General Clinton. So a new plan needed to be established. If we were not only going to have to put down this rebellion in North America, we were also going to have to fight the French and the Spanish and the Dutch abroad. But we've beaten them before. But we needed to put down this rebellion. So the new plan of attack was this. A small but highly professional army would be sent to the southern theater of operations, in which we might find that 1/3 of the population that still wished to remain loyal to King George. Then we could somehow put down this rebellion by raising up new regiments of loyalists. And new regiments were in fact formed. This first regiment was called the Queen's Rangers. It would be commanded by a noble officer, former of the 40th Regiment of Foot, John Graves Simcoe. Indeed, some have maligned his name as well as a scoundrel, but again, nothing could be further from the truth. A fine officer. And so thus commanding the Queen's Rangers would be a unit called a legion. I would be made lieutenant colonel in what was called the British Legion. Initially, this was given to Lord Cathcart. He would be the colonel of the regiment, but he was then in turn promoted again to quartermaster general, and he would thus be removed from that position, leaving me solely in command of this new unit. Now, some of you might ask, what exactly is a legion? Perhaps it harks back to ancient Rome. When you think of the legions of Rome, of Julius Caesar, of Mark Antony, of Augustus and Octavian, well, this legion was a bit different. It was a new organization that was developed in the early part of the 18th century during the War of Austrian Succession, from 1740 to 48, in which it would be a self-contained unit that could act independently from the main army. So, of the three parts of an army, the infantry, the foot soldier with the musket, the cavalry, the soldiers on horseback, typically carrying swords, and the artillery, they would all be combined in this legion, and they would move very, very quickly. Typically, there would be 4 companies of infantry and 2 troops of cavalry, and maybe a light piece of artillery, like a 3-pounder you might have seen fired today. So thus these new organizations were created, and it was thought that because of the terrain of North America, they would work quite well. I did extensive training on Long Island, there working in conjunction with the Queen's Rangers of John Graves Simcoe, but soon I would be given my first opportunity for independent command. And that command came at the Battle of Pound Ridge, the 1st of July, 1779. Those of you who are familiar with the environs of New York City and its boroughs, Pound Ridge is in Westchester County. Well, it was on the evening of July the 1st that I was given this command of about 200 mounted soldiers, dragoons as we call them, actually receiving their name from the weapon that they used to carry in the 17th century, called a dragon, which is a French name. What does a dragon spit out? Fire, exactly, but instead of fire, it would fire a musket ball. So thus that is how they acquired their names. Please come and join us, madam. So, during the Battle of Pound Ridge on the 1st of July, it had rained extensively, and there was thunder and lightning. And for a cavalryman, that actually is to the benefit, because we don't normally use our pistols and our carbines against the enemy, but instead, we use the cold steel. And it matters not if it rains or not. It shan't affect our powder, for we were not using it in that case. And it was during the Battle of Pound Ridge that I distinguished myself, and I was once again mentioned in the dispatches to General Clinton. Well, the new campaign was about to begin. We were to move southwards, there to gain control of the southern theater of operations. Unfortunately, news of the death of the wife of Lord Cornwallis forced him to return back home to her bedside before she passed on, and General Clinton assumed command for a time, and we found great success in the South. The fall of Charleston in May of 1780, some great exploits that I was able to take part, such as Monk's Corner, the Blackstocks, and then we came to the Battle of the Waxhaws, which I dare say many of you Americans present refer to as the massacre at the Waxhaws. By a show of hands, how many of you have heard of the Battle of the Waxhaws? Indeed. And how many of you, with a show of hands again, refer to it as the massacre of the Waxhaws? Yes, you're a bit hesitant this time, aren't you? I've drawn that sword 3 times on your behalf. Well, gentlemen and ladies, it was during the siege of Charleston, when Charleston had just recently fell. We offered opportunity for General Benjamin Lincoln to have an unconditional surrender, in which he had to surrender everything. All of his weapons, all of his flags, all of his instruments, everything, and the city itself. And his men would be taken prisoner. 5,000. Indeed, it was a great victory for sure for His Majesty. But there was a relief force being sent from Virginia under a man named Colonel Buford. Well, I was told there to intercept him, to prevent him from supporting or relieving the siege of Charleston. So I took about 200 dragoons, and in the heat and humidity of late May, there, right on the border of North and South Carolina, I engaged Colonel Buford. Now, I offered him the same exact terms of surrender that we had offered General Benjamin Lincoln. Unconditional surrender, but you will keep your lives. And how does Buford respond? Oh, he did not respond at all. He was ready for a fight. If you want to fight, I will give you a fight. So I ordered my men to advance and attack immediately. We drew our sabers. My dragoons rode right into them. And they were ill prepared. A commander who refuses to surrender and is then ill-prepared is no commander at all. Would you not agree, sir? Indeed. So in the midst of that battle, my horse was shot from under me. I was knocked unconscious. I had lost control of the situation. Many of my men were very loyal to me. Remember, we had taken part in a great deal of training on Long Island. There was an excellent esprit de corps amongst all of them. Well, they thought I had been killed. And some of Buford's men began putting up flags of surrender. Others took their muskets with bayonet and stuffed them into the ground, signifying that they wished to surrender as well. But yet others continued the fight. What is a soldier to think in the midst of this battle going on? So the battle continued. I regained consciousness, I mounted a new horse, I stopped the battle, and I stopped the bloodletting. There was no massacre at all. Immediately, I wrote my dispatch to General Clinton, informing him of precisely what had occurred, of those that had been killed, those that had been wounded, those that had been captured, and the number we estimated that had in fact escaped. Also, some of the equipment and supplies that were being used for the relief was also reported to the enemy. So, as a result of this, there was no wrongdoing at all. This man that stands before you, Colonel Tarleton, did not take part in any massacre at all. The next day, I wrote a more detailed account of what had indeed occurred, and there was no wrongdoing found at all. In fact, I was mentioned yet again in the dispatches for performing admirably against the enemy. Well, the campaign, of course, would continue. There, more battles would be fought. I would fight the Battle of Camden in August of 1780, in which your commander of the Southern forces, General Granny Gates, didn't you refer to him as that, had not only lost the battle, but had the audacity to ride 100 miles away from his dead and dying soldiers on the battlefield. Would you like a commander such as that in command of you? I think not. He is no commander at all. Well, unfortunately, we received news that a new commander would soon after be appointed. And it would be in October of 1780, a man by the name of General Nathaniel Greene, a Rhode Island man, as I understand it. And he would find new subordinate commanders to include in December of 1780 that fellow you call the old wagoneer, Daniel Morgan. And he would come to his assistance. Well, it would be there at the close of 1780 that Lord Cornwallis had returned and was advancing northward into North Carolina. But the problem was, this new commander, Daniel Morgan, was now placed on our extreme left flank. And so thus Lord Cornwallis could not advance without fear of his left flank being attacked. So something needed to be done. We had a fortress called 96 a bit further to the west, and we thought this man, Daniel Morgan, was going to attack it. So, rightly so, my Lord Cornwallis dispatched me and my British Legion there to attack and to stop and to destroy Daniel Morgan. Of course, I immediately obeyed. And there I rode into action all the way to 96, at which I did not find Daniel Morgan, so then I pursued him. It would be on the 16th of January, 1781, that some of my scouts reported that the enemy had made camp, and it appeared as if they were preparing for battle. On the morning of the 17th of January, we soon discovered they had formed a line of battle and were prepared to fight. Nothing could have pleased me more, because believe it or not, in the front line of Daniel Morgan's force was in fact militia. Do you know what militia is? It is every able-bodied man from 16 to 60 years of age capable of bearing arms. Now, it is true, some had served in the Continental Line before and had finished their time of enlistment and thus had returned home, but were still subject to be part of the militia. But the vast majority of militia were young boys who would sooner throw down their musket or firelock and run away from the enemy. Did not even your beloved General Washington refer to militia as a glass rod easily broken? And I could not agree more, and I looked forward to breaking that glass rod. So, as we saw the enemy standing before us, I immediately ordered the attack. I knew the militia would not stand against my beloved dragoons. So, order of battle, to the advance, charge! And we charged towards the enemy, but unfortunately, this Daniel Morgan had seen quite a bit of action. He had seen action around Quebec in 75. He had taken part in those twin battles at Saratoga in September and October of 77. And he made great use of his sharpshooters, his riflemen. And so thus many of my dragoons were unhorsed as a result of that. So I wheeled my men around and I decided to launch an infantry assault towards the center, placing my dragoons upon the right and the left flank and advance towards the enemy. Well, the militia had the audacity to fire not once, but twice. And then they, of course, dispersed. So I assumed at that moment that the enemy was in full retreat. So I ordered a general advance. But unfortunately, behind the slope and the land, I soon discovered that it was not just militia I was facing, but Continental Line. And not just Continental Line, but the cavalry of William Washington. And they advanced with great audacity. Indeed, the 71st Highlanders, who advanced with me on the left flank, tried to turn and fire towards the enemy, but it was the Continental Line that discharged such a volley that it decimated them, and they were unable to continue in the battle that day. The rest of my forces began to crumble. William Washington came over the hill. My dragoons were dispersed. What was I to do? Well, to fight another day. And unfortunately, I was forced to relay this information to my Lord Cornwallis that unfortunately this battle known as the Cowpens did not end as well as His Majesty would have wished it. But it was one setback. I did not let it stop me. And now we were able to advance northward into North Carolina, of which we did, and we would engage the enemy under General Nathaniel Greene on March the 15th of 1781 at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. Yes, not a great day for His Majesty again. It was a victory, a strategic victory, but tactically we could not sustain any more victories such as that, for our casualties were in excess of what the enemy's were. Well, General Nathaniel Greene dispersed his men and was to fight another day, and my Lord Cornwallis was in need of finding what we call a deep water port, a place in which His Majesty's ships could come to support us and either bring additional soldiers and supplies, or we could be removed to a different theater of operations. But the problem is that General Clinton, all the way up in New York City, felt that General Washington and the newly arrived French under General Rochambeau were going to attack New York City. So he kept writing my Lord Cornwallis and requesting that he dispatch this battalion, or this regiment, or this company. So a force of 9,000 was now dwindling to about 8,000 or below. So Lord Cornwallis had made his way into Virginia. Now, Virginia had been occupied recently by that former American soldier that finally came to his senses and joined His Majesty once again. Of course, I talk of the hero, General Benedict Arnold. We may all recall him. You have changed your ways. I have succeeded, at least with one person, yes. So General Benedict Arnold had been dispatched to Westover Plantation along the James River, and he was given two subordinates, Colonel Dundas of the 80th Regiment of Foot, and of course my companion, John Brave Simcoe and the Queen's Rangers. Virginia had been untouched. Since the departure of the royal governor at that time, John Murray, the 4th Earl of Dunmore, Virginia had not really seen much action. Yes, some small actions at Great Bridge and around Norfolk, but for the most part, this breadbasket of North America was untouched. So all of its military supplies, foodstuffs, could all be used for the war effort, whomever could get their hands upon it, and we were going to take those said supplies. So as a result, after General Benedict Arnold wreaked havoc up and down the James River, and then was replaced by a General Phillips who succumbed to a fever at Petersburg, my Lord Cornwallis entered into Virginia. This is the glorious moment. For opposing him was the young boy. You know of whom I speak, don't you? It was the young Marquis de Lafayette. That statue in search of a pedestal. Have you heard that before? I heard your famous John Adams said of him that he has a canine appetite for popularity. So, of course, we knew his battle plans. that he was always going to be in search of glory and trying to find a victory, even though his forces were, of course, far inferior to what we had. I recall even before he assumed command, Point of Fork, where you had a depot of supplies out in the west, Baron von Steuben did not do such a good job of securing those things. But then once Lafayette did take command, Spencer's Ordinary, north of the city, and then we decided to occupy Williamsburg City, not far from here, there to rest and recuperate our soldiers. We were still in search of that deep water port, and, well, where are some deep water ports here in Virginia? Well, there's, of course, Norfolk, there is Portsmouth, but it's on the south side of the river, and we were there on the peninsula, so we would have to cross the river. So it was decided on the 4th of July, 1781, we would depart Williamsburg, cross the James River, and then make our way to Portsmouth. On the 6th of July, we began the crossing. Now, Lord Cornwallis is a veteran of many, many battles. Perhaps the best general I have had the honor and privilege to have served with. So he knew that young Marquis was going to attack him. So we had set a trap for him. And on the 6th of July, 1781, right at the crossing at Jamestown, near Green Springs Plantation, we set a trap for the young Marquis. He came blundering down the road in the heat and humidity with the advance guard led by the Pennsylvanians under that madman known as General Anthony Wayne. No, he's really known as Mad Anthony Wayne, and perhaps rightly so. Well, we engaged the enemy, and though they came on piecemeal, there was some tenacity amongst those Pennsylvanians. Once, I think, the young Marquis realized that he could not win that day, he tried to break off the engagement. I requested of my Lord Cornwallis that I be unleashed, that I might assault the enemy with an open charge, but he refused me. He said, it is better for us to cross the river, to make our way to our deep water port. And so thus I obeyed his commands. The sun began to set, we crossed the river, we made our way to Portsmouth, we received more dispatches from Clinton telling us that he needed more and more men to return to New York, for there was an imminent attack by Washington and Rochambeau. So instead of remaining in Portsmouth, in which there are too many avenues of approach, we decided to get on board our boats and come to a place called Yorktown. Now, Yorktown, despite what you might think and despite what occurred, was actually quite the sensible decision. Remember, we are upon a peninsula, are we not? With the York River, and then further south is the James River, and then to our east is the Chesapeake Bay. So that means that the only avenue of approach for the enemy will be from the northwest, that of Richmond Town, coming down the peninsula, especially if we have control of the sea, which of course, we are Englishmen, we always have control of the sea, do we not? But unfortunately, one thing we did not expect, and that was an arrival of a French fleet. And that French fleet did in fact arrive. We are told upon the 5th day of September, 1781, under a man named Admiral de Grasse. And there he engaged an English fleet under Admiral Graves, and unfortunately, I know it is hard to believe, and I would not believe it if I did not see it, we were defeated. Yes, the French fleet, for one of the first times, was able to defeat the English fleet and send Admiral Graves there back to New York. So what did this mean? Well, it meant myself and all of the English army under Lord Cornwallis were now trapped at Yorktown with no possibility of escape by sea or resupply by sea. So what were we to do? We were to fortify ourselves. We were to prepare. So by the 30th of August, we had made our way to Yorktown, and my Lord Cornwallis ordered fortifications to be built. Being that during a siege, cavalry does not have much of a use at all, he decided to dispatch myself and Colonel Simcoe across the river to Gloucester Point, where we are at present, there to fortify ourselves there to prevent the enemy from attacking my Lord Cornwallis at Yorktown from the rear. Also, it was a point of egress that we could escape from Yorktown if need be. So, with Colonel Dundas and the 80th Regiment of Foot, with John Brave Simcoe and the Queen's Rangers, and with my British Legion, we remained here. Now, we soon discovered that General Washington and General Rochambeau would arrive in Williamsburg to join up with the young Marquis de Lafayette on the 14th of September, and more of their soldiers gathered. We are told that many of the Virginia militia rose up in great numbers, as high as 5,000, though I think that was an inflated number, and they had amassed 21,000 men. We had just over 7,000. Many of them were actually succumbing to the malady known as the smallpox. But here I was in Gloucester Point. I had to procure supplies as best I could. So it would be on the 3rd of October, 1781, while I was on a foraging expedition with the cavalry of my legion, as well as Colonel Simcoe's dragoons, as well as elements of the 17th Regiment of Foot, and many, many wagons. We needed supplies. Remember how soldiers must eat to survive, to fight another day. Remember that a horse, madam, that a simple horse that is going to be used for the cavalry will require 8 to 10 pounds of grain or corn, 8 to 10 pounds of fodder, of straw, of hay, of grass, and 8 to 12 gallons of water per horse. That is a tremendous amount of supplies, is it not? So we were out on our foraging expedition, but of course by October you knew very well that the vast majority of the harvests were in. So all we really found was Spanish corn, some bales of hay, some sacks of grain, not much at all, but enough to sustain the army long enough until General Clinton would finally realize that General Washington had not intended to attack New York. So thus there, the 3rd of October, I had gone to a tavern down the road called Sewell's, or Sewell's as they called it, Ordinary. I must admit, I was met by a beautiful young lady. I was told that she was the daughter of Mr. Sewell. And she brought some refreshment to my officers, and there we made our way back towards our lines there to give the supplies across the river to my Lord Cornwallis. Well, it appears that shortly thereafter, the French commander of the cavalry, a man by the name of the Duc de Lausanne, which you have the audacity to put a placard on the wall before him, was also performing a reconnaissance, and he went to that same tavern and spoke to that same lovely young lady. And she told him that, oh, Colonel Tarleton is desirous to shake hands with the Duke as soon as possible. So he realized that I was close by. So he advanced his hussars, his cavalry, as quickly as possible. And shortly thereafter, the first shots rang out. Well, I ordered my wagons to go back behind the entrenchments, and then I ordered the cavalry to turn and face the enemy. We formed line of battle, both the Queen's Rangers and the British Legion. And there before us was the Duc de Lausanne himself, with his hussars. We began the charge. We came right towards them. Unfortunately, one of my fellow soldiers' horses was killed, and it fell right before me, and it toppled my horse. So thus I was there upon the ground vulnerable, when I would have fought single combat against the Duc de Lausanne, and no doubt killed him that day, and my placard would be upon the wall. But the battle was joined. There were nearly 500 horsemen mingling amongst one another, fighting for survival that day. So even some Virginia militia came up. It was Colonel Mercer, was it not? Yes. He called his men the Grenadiers. Oh, come now, how excessive. But admittedly, they did fight well that day. And some more French came up under General Choisy, as I think his name was, and we tried to extricate ourselves as best we could, and we did. I was able to survive. My men pulled me from my horse that was on top of me, and I was able to make my way across the lines. But unfortunately, this said Battle of the Hook, this Battle of Gloucester Point, was in fact a defeat. Now, gentlemen and ladies, we know how it ends. We know the 19th of October, my Lord Cornwallis had done all that he possibly could for the honor and glory of His Majesty's soldiers. After all, I had mentioned that nearly 3,000 to 4,000 of them were ill, many suffering from wounds, many suffering from sickness, and so why continue the siege if there was no possibility of victory? So he did the most honorable thing, and that was surrender. So the 19th of October, 1781, a day that shall live in infamy amongst His Majesty's forces, my Lord Cornwallis was forced to surrender. 1 hour after that surrender, another surrender occurred here at Gloucester Point, of which, of course, I was part of, and we were forced to deliver our soldiers up to this rebel force under General Washington. Well, I would board a ship with Lord Cornwallis and his staff. We would go to New York. We would report report to General Clinton, and I would return to England. But I was returned as a hero for my exploits, for I had risen in rank from that of junior lieutenant to that of lieutenant colonel. Indeed, some believe that I shall become a member of Parliament. Some believe that I shall be even knighted for my exploits during the war, and of course my military career shall continue, so it has not come to an end. So gentlemen and ladies, yes, I have had some setbacks. I dare say the Cowpens would be the worst. I dare say that the Battle of the Hook, well, it was an unfortunate occurrence in which, were it not for my fellow soldier whose horse was killed before me and knocked me down, I think I would have taken the field that day. And I suppose the loss at Yorktown and eventually the signing of the Treaty of Paris has ended my time here in North America. But who have heard it from my mouth here today of what has truthfully occurred? As you can see, I don't have any horns on my head, do I? I'm not a monster. You don't see a dragon's tail, do you? The young man, he speaks truth right there. So as you can see, I should be nothing but honored for my exploits during the war that I have performed as an honorable, true soldier for His Majesty, serving his country and serving his regiment as best as possible. Now, that being said, I have said a great many things today, and I see several of you yawning already. But I am hopeful that before we depart one another's company, that some of you might have some questions or curiosities of me, that I might be able to enlighten you a little bit about what I have spoken of here today, or to further elaborate on some of the things that I have said. Yes, Madam Savannah, I think is your name, is it not?
It is, General. Thank you for remembering.
Did I remember lots of things?
No, you seem to have forgotten at Cowpens that you abandoned your own army the same way you kind of dug on our people for doing.
Indeed, Madam says that I seem to have forgotten that at the Cowpens that I abandoned my army the same way that I forget the vernacular in which you put it, Savannah, but the way the Americans had abandoned their force as well. Madam, at that moment during the engagement lasted 30 minutes long. It was not long at all. Had I remained upon the battlefield, I would undoubtedly have been taken by Daniel Morgan, and no doubt, because of him, I would have been put to death, perhaps immediately, perhaps hanged from a tree, knowing his reputation. So it was in my best interest, and in truth, Savannah, the best interest of His Majesty and Lord Cornwallis for me to fight another day. I'm not boasting, I'm simply speaking the truth. I am the best cavalry commander, either on the American, French, or British side. So a loss such as that could not be replaced. So I was doing His Majesty a favor by escaping the battlefield to fight another day. So please, Savannah, choose your words more wisely next time.
I have a follow-up question.
Of course you do, yes.
How does Cornwallis feel about Tarleton's quarter?
How does Lord Cornwallis feel about Tarleton's quarter? He never had any issue. In fact, a lot of this is fabricated. Indeed, after this war has come to an end. Indeed, I have never seen written before in any gazette, whether it is published by American propaganda, such as Madam here, or by others, in which they refer to me as Bloody Van, the Butcher, or Tarleton's quarter. I think, as so many things throughout history, after the fact, it shall be created to make me demonized, to make me more of a monster, to create something that is not accurate, Madam. I speak the truth. I am standing before you, Savannah. You are hearing it from my mouth, the truth of what occurred in the Southern Campaign. Yes, sir. I knew you were going to
On top of that, I've heard a story, and I think it is just a story, that on the surrender, you were worried about your safety, particularly, which is a little surprising because the terms were pretty lenient. So is that another story that there was? I think the story goes you sought help or protection from someone. I forget who it is. You know what I'm
Indeed, the gentleman speaks of upon the surrender, and indeed when there was the march past the French and American forces on the 19th, that there was some concern over my safety. Yes, indeed there was. In fact, there was some fellow of which I procured his horse from his farm in the service of His Majesty, who had a cudgel. A cudgel is a stick. And he said he was going to knock me off his horse if I did not dismount and give it back to him. Well, I knew I was going to board a ship to go to New York, and there was no need for that horse, so I obliged him, and I gave him that horse. I did have a concern at that moment, sir, but I did ingratiate myself with the French officers, knowing that the American officers did not care for me terribly well. But again, I don't think the American officers at that moment thought I was a butcher or bloody bandit, but I was the reconnaissance element for Lord Cornwallis. Thus, I took part in many expeditions in which I had to procure supplies from many, many plantations. But truth be told, your hero, General Light Horse Harry Lee, did similar things, did he not? And was it not a loyalist force that they thought he was part of the British Legion, but in fact he was part of Lee's Legion, and he butchered them all? No one wants to talk about that, do they? Well, nonetheless, sir, yes, I did ingratiate myself with the French officers as opposed to the American officers that day. Yes, sir.
What campaigns did you take part in upon your return to Great Britain?
Indeed, an excellent question that the gentleman asks. What campaigns do I hope to take part in upon my return back to England? Well, in truth, I had hoped that I could once again serve my Lord Cornwallis, who was believed to be getting dispatched to the subcontinent of India to assume a new command, that I might continue to serve as his cavalry element in his force. But it was not to be, and I must admit that my challenge with money has still plagued me, and I have grown a little bit into debt. So my plan for now, sir, is to actually not only leave England, but to go to Paris. The war has come to an end. If you've not been to Paris, you'll understand why I'm going. And I seem to have taken the acquaintance of an actress, her name Mary Robinson. Some call her Perdita upon the stage. And we have decided that we shall spend some time in Paris enjoying the sights, the sounds, and maybe meeting with the Duc de Lauzun, maybe meeting with the young Marquis de Lafayette and reflecting upon the war. So at present, sir, I do not have a command, but instead I am, as we like to say, on holiday. I think I have time for another question. Yes, good sir.
I read after one of your failed battles, you submitted a resignation. Why would someone of your stature desire to resign?
Well, firstly, the gentleman's question, he heard after one of my failed battles that I submitted a resignation. It is absurd, sir. I've never done such a thing. Indeed, my failed battles were challenges more than failures. I think, yes, I could learn from them of what took place, the Battle of the Cowpens. Perhaps I pushed my men a bit too hard. Perhaps there was a bit too much audacity, or some will call it hubris, excessive pride. Perhaps at the Battle of the Hook, things could have changed a little bit better in my favor. But never, never would I give up my command, sir. Never would I relinquish my commission, especially during the midst of an engagement, a war. So nothing could be further from the truth, sir. I shall not submit my resignation, and I know further glory is awaiting me into the future. In fact, gentlemen and ladies, as I depart my memories of Gloucester Point, of the Battle of the Hook that took place on the 3rd of October, 1781, I am reminded of the importance of history, of remembering the past. For I am a firm believer that all of the answers to the future might be found in the past, if we study our history. So, good sir, perhaps I can learn what I did wrong at the Cowpens. And the next time I fight in a battle such as the Cowpens, I will find victory by learning from the past. Perhaps when I think of what occurred at the Battle of the Hook, I can learn from my failures there and find success in the future. And that can always be achieved by learning about your history. I think the greatest victories in life are actually not won upon any battlefield, but rather knowledge over ignorance. Gentlemen and ladies, I am your humble servant. I am Lieutenant Colonel Banastre Tarleton of the British Legion. God save the King! foul weather here today and for joining me this afternoon to listen to the story of Colonel Tarleton. In reality, my name is Mark Schneider, and I work for the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, in which I typically portray the Marquis de Lafayette, General Rochambeau, and assorted other characters, but on occasion I do put on the British hat and portray Colonel Banastre Tarleton, and I enjoy telling the story of his exploits during the war. So here in Gloucester, where the Battle of the Hook actually took place, there's such a rich history. There's so many layers from the establishment of Jamestown and the settlement of Gloucester during the 17th century to the part that it played during the American Revolution and all of the history that would come thereafter. I find it an honor and a privilege and a pleasure to be able to tell the story of one segment of that history. But if you are in fact interested in the history of Gloucester, right next door, if you have not seen it already, the Gloucester Historical Museum, where you can learn a lot about the past of Gloucester, the more recent past, but also the far past, and the Battle of the Hook as well. So I am honored and privileged to have had you all here today. Thank you for taking the time to join me. I shall remain behind to answer any other questions or curiosities that you might have, or if you're in want of painting a quick portrait with me, with the Butcher Tarleton. But thank you so much for joining me, friends, and please, safe journey home, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event here at Gloucester Courthouse. Thank you, dear friends.